She was invisible to him. For 3 years, Rose Mullins had moved through Ashcroft Manor like a shadow, silent, efficient, forgettable. She polished silver he never touched, arranged flowers he never noticed, and served meals he consumed without once lifting his eyes from whatever document demanded his ducal attention. She was furniture, she was background, she was nothing. Until the morning she watched him reach for his coffee cup, and his hand would not stop trembling, and she was the only one in England who knew why, and how to stop it. The question was whether she dared, because saving Leopold Ashcroft, the Duke of Ashcroft, meant stepping out of the shadows forever. It meant letting him see her. And Rose Mullins had survived this long precisely because powerful men had never truly looked at her. Her mother had made that mistake once. Rose had sworn she never would. If you love dark Regency romance with slow burn tension and forbidden desire, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below. Would you have saved him? Leopold Ashcroft had turned 32 years old in the spring of 1810, with all the fanfare of a man who considered his own birthday an administrative inconvenience. There had been a dinner, naturally. There was always a dinner at Ashcroft Manor, attended by a carefully curated selection of lords, viscounts, and a bishop who owed Leopold a political favour. The champagne had been excellent. The conversation had been adequate, and Leopold had excused himself at 10:30, retreated to his study, and spent the remainder of his birthday reviewing proposed amendments to the Enclosure Acts. This was, those who knew him agreed, entirely characteristic. Leopold was not a cold man, exactly. He was precise. He was efficient. He moved through the social obligations of his dukedom the way a master chess player moves pieces, each gesture calculated, each word chosen for effect. He had inherited the title at 24 when his father dropped dead of an apoplexy mid-sentence at his club, and the weight of Ashcroft, the lands, the debts his father had hidden, the political alliances that needed mending, had landed on Leopold's shoulders with no warning and no ceremony. He had not buckled. He had not faltered. He had simply reorganized. 8 years on, the Ashcroft estate was solvent. The political alliances were rebuilt into something stronger, and Leopold himself had developed the particular quality of stillness that comes from never allowing oneself the luxury of panic. He was broadly considered the most formidable duke in the south of England. He was also, his housekeeper, Mrs. Baxter, privately noted, entirely alone. Not that Mrs. Baxter would ever say so aloud. She had managed Ashcroft Manor for 16 years, had survived the old duke's chaotic spending, the younger duke's ruthless restructuring, and she had absolutely no intention of risking her position by offering opinions about her employer's emotional landscape. She simply observed, and what she observed, in the autumn of 1810, was a man who worked too many hours, slept too few, and had recently, very recently, broken off an almost engagement with one Lady Cordelia Stowe in a manner that society was still dissecting with gleeful precision. The particulars of the Stowe affair were these. Leopold had courted Cordelia with appropriate attention for 2 seasons, had been on the verge of making a formal offer, and had then, with the kind of abrupt decisiveness that characterized all his actions, withdrawn. No formal proposal had been made. No announcement had appeared in the papers, but the understanding had been sufficiently public that Cordelia's humiliation was total, and her father, Lord Stowe, had been heard at 3 separate clubs expressing opinions about Leopold Ashcroft's character that fell just short of actionable. Leopold, characteristically, had not responded. He had returned to Ashcroft Manor, his country estate in Surrey, 50 miles from London, at the end of the season, and had given every indication of intending to remain there through autumn and into winter, attending to estate business and pointedly declining all invitations that might require him to encounter the Stowe family. It was, his secretary noted with some relief, the quietest the manor had been in years. Rose Mullins had come to Ashcroft Manor in the winter of 1807, when she was 19 years old and possessed of a letter of recommendation, a small cloth bag containing everything she owned, and a determination so solid it could have been quarried. She had told Mrs. Baxter she had experience in domestic service. This was true, if one counted the 2 years she had spent keeping house for old Mr. Tilney in the village of Dorking after her mother died. She had not mentioned her father. There was nothing to gain from mentioning her father, and quite a lot to lose. Her father was Edmund Mullins, Dr. Edmund Mullins, as he styled himself, though his doctorate had been conferred by an institution of debatable legitimacy. What was not debatable was his knowledge. Edmund Mullins was, in the judgment of those who could assess such things, among the finest herbalists and botanical physicians in England. He had corresponded with scholars in Germany and France. He had published 2 monographs on the medicinal properties of native English flora that were read, quietly and without attribution, by physicians who publicly dismissed folk medicine as superstition. He was also a man of spectacular selfishness, who had loved Rose's mother for exactly as long as it had been convenient, and had abandoned them both, mother and illegitimate daughter, when Rose was 11 years old, leaving nothing behind but a locked chest of notebooks, and the unspoken understanding that Rose had inherited whatever gift he possessed. She had opened the notebooks 2 days after her mother died. She had read them with the focused attention of someone building an arsenal. By the time she arrived at Ashcroft Manor 3 years later, Rose could identify 247 medicinal plants by sight, smell, or touch. She knew which roots settled a fever, which berries quieted a racing heart, which bark steeped in water would ease the particular ache behind the eyes that came from too much candlelight. She knew which combinations healed, and which, in the wrong dose, could kill. She kept this knowledge the way she kept everything important: quiet, interior, invisible. At Ashcroft Manor, she was a housemaid. She polished. She swept. She changed linens and carried trays, and was, as far as anyone could observe, entirely unremarkable. She preferred it that way. 3 years passed. She was promoted to parlour maid, then to lady's maid for the occasions when female guests stayed at the manor. She learned the rhythms of the house, the cook's moods, the footman's gossip, Mrs. Baxter's exacting standards. She learned, without ever intending to, the rhythms of the Duke himself. When he worked through dinner, which rooms he paced when he was frustrated, the particular quality of silence that fell over the house when he was in a black mood. She noticed these things the way one notices weather, not because she cared about him, because knowledge, all knowledge, was a form of protection. It began in early October 1810 with a headache. Leopold was not a man who admitted to headaches. The ailment seemed beneath him somehow, too ordinary, too human. But one evening, in the first week of October, Rose was passing the study with a tray of tea for Mrs. Baxter when she heard something she had never heard before, the Duke's chair scraping back, and then a long silence, and then the sound of a man pressing his fingers hard against his temples. She did not stop walking. It was not her business. The next morning, he was at breakfast as usual, immaculate and expressionless, and she thought she had imagined it. But then there was the second week, and the shaking hands. She noticed because it was her job to notice things that others overlooked: a smudge on the silver, a drape hung crookedly, a fire that wanted banking. She was refilling the decanter on the sideboard when she saw Leopold reach for his coffee cup, and his hand, just briefly, trembled. The tremor lasted perhaps 2 seconds. He steadied himself. He glanced up, but she had already looked away, her face arranged in the careful blankness of a well-trained servant. She walked back to the kitchen and stood very still for a moment, turning over what she had seen. By the 3rd week of October, Leopold had lost weight. She could see it in the way his coat sat differently on his shoulders, in the way his cheekbones sharpened. He was eating. She watched the trays come back, but not with appetite. He drank his wine at dinner, but left the port untouched, which Mrs. Baxter noted was unprecedented. He had also, Rose observed, developed a faint yellowish cast to his complexion. Almost nothing, almost invisible. But she had her father's eyes, trained on 1,000 specimens, and she saw it. She saw it and felt the cold, certain recognition of something she had read about once in her father's notebooks. In a section he had titled, in his cramped academic hand, On the Slow Poisons and Their Disguise as Natural Illness. That night, for the first time in 3 years at Ashcroft Manor, Rose Mullins could not sleep. She needed to be certain before she did anything. Certainty required evidence, and evidence required access she was not supposed to have. Rose had learned patience in the same school that had taught her everything else, necessity. She waited. She watched. She began, with extreme care, to track what Leopold consumed. It took 4 days to identify the pattern, the symptoms: headache, tremor, the yellowish undertone, the loss of appetite. They worsened on days when he drank from the small private reserve of Bordeaux that sat in the locked cabinet in his study, the wine that was poured only for him and never touched by guests or staff. They eased slightly on days when he had visitors and drank from the general cellar instead. On the 5th day, while the Duke was riding, one of the few habits he had maintained through his illness, because Leopold Ashcroft did not adjust his habits for something as inconvenient as feeling unwell, Rose did something she could have been dismissed for on the spot. She went into his study. The room smelled of him, paper and leather, and something faintly mineral, like cold stone. She did not allow herself to linger on the sensation. She moved to the cabinet, examined the lock, a simple mechanism, and used the wire she had brought for precisely this purpose. The Bordeaux was dark in the bottle. She poured a small measure into the glass vial she had tucked into her apron pocket, held it to the window light, and looked. There, in the afternoon sun, a faint iridescent sheen, almost nothing, a shimmer that most people would mistake for the natural quality of old wine. Rose knew what it was. She had read about it in her father's notebooks under the heading of a plant with a name that sounded almost beautiful: Atropa belladonna, combined in minute quantities with the expressed oil of white hellebore. Administered in small doses over weeks, it produced exactly what Leopold was experiencing: headache, tremor, the gradual yellowing of the skin, the slow erosion of appetite and strength. Administered long enough, it produced something else. Her hands were steady as she recorked the vial. This was the moment she had been dreading, because the next question was not medical. The next question was whether she should do anything at all. He did not know she existed. She could walk out of this study, return to her duties, and leave the Duke of Ashcroft to whatever fate his enemies had arranged for him. She owed him nothing. He had never extended her a single moment of acknowledgement in 3 years. She was furniture to him, background. She stood in his study for a long time. Then she thought of her mother, not in grief, but in warning. Her mother had made the mistake of placing herself in a powerful man's orbit, of allowing herself to become necessary to him, and the moment she had done so, she had handed him the means of her destruction. Rose knew all of this. She put the vial in her pocket and walked back to the servants' quarters. She did not sleep again that night, either. What settled it, in the end, was not conscience. Rose was honest enough with herself to admit that what settled it was the conversation she overheard on the morning of the 28th of October between the underfootman Thomas and the kitchen boy Jack, conducted in the whispered urgency of people sharing something too large for them to carry. The Duke's physician had been summoned from London. Dr. Hargreaves had examined Leopold the previous afternoon and had departed shaking his head, saying something about a mysterious decline, about the liver, about the possibility of a prolonged convalescence. He had prescribed rest, reduced wine, and a tonic that, from Thomas's description, Rose recognized as containing ingredients that would, at best, do nothing, and at worst, interact badly with the poison already in Leopold's system. She made her decision the way her father had taught her to make decisions about plants, by ruling out every alternative first, and accepting what remained. She could tell Mrs. Baxter, but Mrs. Baxter would not believe a housemaid who claimed to know more than a London physician about poison, and even if she did, the information would travel through channels that gave whoever was behind this time to vanish and time to ensure Rose did not cause further inconvenience. She could go to the authorities, but she was an illegitimate woman with no standing and a father whose reputation, such as it was, existed in circles that the law regarded with deep suspicion. She would be dismissed as a nuisance at best and something worse at worst. She could do nothing, and Leopold Ashcroft would be dead by Christmas. Or she could step out of the shadows. She spent 1 more hour in debate with herself. Then she went to find the Duke. He was in the library, which surprised her. In her 3 years at the manor, she had never seen him in the library in the morning. The mornings were for his study, for correspondence and estate business. But he was here, and she understood, seeing him settled in the wing-back chair by the window with a book open across his lap, and his eyes not quite focused on it. That he was not here for the books. He was here because the light was better, and the chair was more comfortable, and he was, though he would never have named it this, tired. He did not look up when she entered. Of course he did not. She was furniture. She crossed the room and stood 3 feet from his chair and said, in a voice she kept even by sheer force of habit, "Your Grace, I need to speak with you about something urgent. I apologize for the presumption." He looked up then, and this was the moment that Rose had not quite prepared for, because there was something in Leopold Ashcroft's face when he finally, genuinely looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, that was not what she had expected. She had braced herself for irritation, for the particular brand of dismissive impatience that powerful men wore like armor. She had not anticipated something that looked almost like recognition, as though he had seen her before, and simply not allowed himself to register it. "You are," he began, and paused, "Mrs. Baxter's parlour maid, Rose." The fact that he knew her name startled her more than she wanted to admit. "Yes, Your Grace." "You are interrupting my morning." But his voice held no real heat. It held something else, a quality of attention she recognized, because it was the same quality she herself possessed. He was assessing her, deciding, in the space of a few seconds, whether she was worth listening to. "I am," she agreed. "I would not do so if I believed it could wait." Something shifted in his expression, infinitesimal, but she had been watching this man for 3 years. "Speak then." She spoke. She did not soften it, did not approach it obliquely, or dress it in the deferential hedging that a smarter servant might have used. She told him what she had observed, what she had found in the wine, what the combination of symptoms and the iridescent residue indicated, and what, if Dr. Hargreaves's tonic was administered alongside the continued exposure, was likely to happen to him within the next 6 to 8 weeks. When she finished, the library was very quiet. Leopold had not moved. He was watching her with an expression she could not read, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly, unhurriedly examined, the way she looked at plants, cataloguing properties. "You are describing poison," he said at last. "Yes, Your Grace. Administered in my private wine. Yes." By someone with access to that cabinet. He was thinking aloud now, and she had enough sense to stay silent, which narrows it to, he stopped. Something changed in his face. Not shock, not surprise. Something older and quieter than either of those things. Recognition of a different kind. "You believe you know who it is," she said, and then immediately wished she had not, because it was not her place, and she had only just talked her way into this conversation, not out of it. But Leopold did not dismiss her. He looked at her for a long moment, with that same unsettling attention. "Tell me your name again. Your full name. Rose Mullins, Your Grace." Mullins. He said it as though placing it. Edmund Mullins, the herbalist. Her stomach tightened. She said nothing. His daughter. Still nothing. "I see." His tone had changed, not hostile, but careful. The way one becomes careful when a situation reveals itself to be more complex than it appeared. "How did you identify the compound?" "My father's notebooks." "Which he left you?" "Which he left behind," she corrected, and she heard her own precision with a kind of weary recognition. It mattered to her, that distinction, even now. "There is a difference, Your Grace." He was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, almost to himself, "Yes, I imagine there is." The silence that followed was unlike any silence she had experienced in this house. It was not the silence of invisibility. It was the silence of 2 people who had each said something true and were deciding what to do with the fact of it. "What is the treatment?" Leopold asked, and Rose Mullins, for the first time in 3 years at Ashcroft Manor, felt herself become visible. She gave him a list. Milk thistle, charcoal-steeped water, yarrow, a preparation of activated clay she could compound herself if given access to the still room, all of it designed to support the liver, counter the accumulation of the poison, and accelerate its passage from his body. She also told him that the wine must be destroyed, every bottle from the private reserve, and that nothing should pass his lips that had not been prepared under conditions she could verify. Leopold listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Dr. Hargreaves should not be told the specifics," she said carefully, "not because he is not competent within his own sphere, but because the less widely this is known, the less warning the person responsible receives. You think they are watching? I think someone who has managed to poison a duke in his own home for 3 weeks without detection is not careless." He absorbed this. She could feel the quality of his thinking. The same efficiency he brought to everything, now turned on a problem that was, for once, personal. "You will need the still room," he said, "and I assume you will need to be able to speak to me without going through the household hierarchy each time. It would be more efficient. Mrs. Baxter will have questions. I expect she will." Another pause. "Or I will tell her you have been assigned to assist me with a correspondence project. It is not entirely unheard of for—" He stopped, and she saw, just briefly, something that might have been discomfort cross his face, as though he had been about to say something and thought better of it. "It will serve," Rose said. "Yes." He looked at her again with that considering gaze. "I am curious about something, Miss Mullins." The unmissed landed strangely. She had been Rose to the household for 3 years, nothing more. "You could have said nothing," he continued. "Most people in your position, with your particular history, would have had excellent reasons to say nothing at all." She met his gaze without flinching. "Most people in my position cannot afford to have excellent reasons for anything, Your Grace. We act on what we know." This time, the silence held something she refused to name. "Begin today," he said. "Use whatever you need from the still room." She curtsied, turned to leave, and had almost reached the door when she heard him say, very quietly, as though to himself, "You have been here 3 years." She paused without turning around. "Yes, Your Grace." "I did not know your name before today." She said nothing. There was nothing to say. She walked out of the library, and the door closed behind her, and she stood in the corridor for one careful moment with her eyes shut and her hands very still. Then she went to the still room to begin. She had her answer about who by the end of the first week. It came not through investigation, that was beyond her reach, but through the particular intelligence of a housemaid who had learned, over 3 years, to be invisible in rooms where conversations happened. She was dusting the corridor outside the small parlour when Lord Alderton, Leopold's closest friend and occasional legal adviser, arrived from London with a travelling bag and a face that said something serious had brought him. The door was not fully closed. She heard 2 names, Stowe and a wine merchant on Clarges Street, who had delivered the private reserve to the manor 3 weeks ago, and who had, it turned out, a brother employed in the Stowe household. She did not hear everything. She did not need to. She told Leopold that evening, their second real conversation, conducted in his study with a formality that felt increasingly strange to her, given what they were actually discussing. He was looking better already. 4 days of her preparations had put some colour back in his face, steadied his hands. He was still too thin, still quieter than she suspected was natural for him, but his mind was sharp, and he was furious in the contained way of a man who considers rage and inefficiency he cannot quite suppress. "Lord Stowe," he said, when she had told him what she knew. "I cannot be certain it was Lord Stowe himself," she said. Only that the connection exists. The connection is sufficient." He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him recalibrate, sorting through the implications the way she sorted through botanical specimens, identifying which properties mattered. "Cordelia." She waited. "This is her father's work," he said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard there before. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. Cordelia would not. She is vain and she was angry, but she is not this. It was not her place to offer an opinion on Lady Cordelia Stowe. She kept her face neutral. "You think I'm wrong," he said. She looked up, startled. "Your Grace, you have an opinion. I can see it. You are simply choosing not to share it." She considered him for a moment. Then, "I think that people who feel humiliated are capable of more than those who love them, believe. I think Lord Stowe is her father. And she knew the wine was going to you. And she made a choice about what questions to ask." The silence stretched. Leopold looked out the window at the darkened grounds. "She would not be the first woman," he said finally, "to do something unforgivable because I was careless with her." It was such an unexpected thing for him to say, such an unflinching piece of self-knowledge, that Rose was momentarily at a loss. She had constructed a version of Leopold Ashcroft in her 3 years here. Precise, cold, efficient, a man who moved through consequences without examining them. This did not fit that version. "You will go to London," she said, because it was the practical thing, and she needed them to be back on practical ground. "Yes, when I am well enough that I do not arrive looking like a man who has been poisoned, which I imagine will be another week or so. I will need—" He paused. "I will need you to continue the preparations, which means coming to London." The air in the room changed. "Your Grace, I know what I am asking." His voice was careful now, deliberate. "I am asking you to leave the position you have held here for 3 years, travel to London in a capacity that will invite speculation, and trust that I will—" Another pause. "I am asking a great deal." "You are," she agreed. Her voice was steady. Her heart was not. "And name what you want in return." She had not expected that. The directness of it. The implication that she had standing to want things, to name them. "I want assurances," she said carefully, "that when this is concluded, my position here is secure, my reputation intact, my—" She stopped. "Your what?" His voice was quiet. "My freedom to leave," she finished, "if I choose to." Something moved in his face. She could not name it. She refused to try. "Oh, you have my word," he said. She should have been satisfied with that. She told herself she was satisfied with that. She spent the next 2 hours in the still room preparing the London supply of her compounds, and she was very careful, throughout, not to think about the way he had said her freedom like it was a thing he understood the value of. Ashcroft House on Grosvenor Square was everything the Surrey estate was not. Tall, white-fronted, pressed among its neighbours like a jewel in a case, and alive with the particular energy of a city house that had been closed for months and was now being rapidly resurrected. They arrived on the 9th of November, 1810, on a cold, clear morning, with a sky the colour of pewter and the smell of coal smoke, and river that Rose had learned was simply London's native perfume. She had been to London twice before, once as a child, once after her mother died. Both times it had felt enormous and indifferent. This time it felt like a stage, which was more unsettling. She had been given a room in the staff quarters on the upper floor, described to the London household as a specialist assistant to the Duke in matters of household health. Mrs. Crane, the London housekeeper, had looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who had opinions and was choosing not to express them. Rose had looked back with the particular expression of a woman who had been surviving other people's opinions her entire life. Within 24 hours, she had established her routine, morning preparations of the treatment compounds, a brief report to Leopold each afternoon, these conducted with scrupulous formality in his study, door open, the footman visible in the hall, and the remainder of her time available for the household tasks that provided her cover. Leopold Sheen, for his part, was recovering. After 2 weeks on her preparations, the jaundiced undertone was gone, the tremors had stopped entirely, and the weight he had lost was returning. He was sharper now, the particular sharpness of a man who had been functioning at 3/4 capacity and was returning to full, and this, Rose discovered, was both reassuring and somewhat alarming, because Leopold at full capacity noticed things. He noticed, for instance, that she was reading. She had made the mistake of leaving her father's notebooks on the corner of his desk one afternoon while she reviewed a preparation, and when she looked up, Leopold was looking at them with an expression of uncomplicated curiosity. "You carry them with you," he said. "They are useful." "May I?" He gestured, and she hesitated, and then nodded, and watched him open the top notebook with the careful hands of someone who handled documents for a living. He was quiet for several minutes. She tried to focus on her notes. "He was brilliant," Leopold said at last. Not a question. "Yes." The word came out clipped. "And you are angry with him." "That is not—" "You do not have to answer," he said. "I'm simply observing." He closed the notebook and placed it back on the desk. "I had a father who was brilliant and catastrophically irresponsible with the people around him. I recognize the particular quality of fury it produces." The silence that followed was unlike any of their previous silences. Something had shifted. Some membrane between appropriate distance and something else had developed a small, dangerous permeability. "You should rest this afternoon," Rose said, firmly. "Why, you have the Alderton dinner tonight, and you should not—" Rose. The use of her given name, not Miss Mullins, not the sharp attention of "you there," stopped her entirely. "I am going to ask you something," he said. "And I am going to ask you to believe that I am asking it honestly, without strategy, because I have spent the last month being honest with you, and I find I am disinclined to stop now." She waited. Her hands, beneath the desk, were not quite steady. "Are you frightened of me?" She stared at him. "Your Grace. Not as your employer. Not in the general sense that any person in your position might be cautious about any person in mine." His voice was careful, precise. "Are you frightened of me, specifically, because I need to understand something?" The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer was, "Not frightened of you. Frightened of what I already know about the way this story ends for women like me. Frightened of the fact that I am starting to look forward to these afternoon conversations. Frightened of the version of myself that appears in this room, that has opinions and argues them and refuses to be furniture." What she said was, "I am cautious." That is not the same thing. "No," she agreed. "It is not." He looked at her for a long time. "Thank you," he said at last, "for telling me the truth." She left his study in the same careful, measured way she always left his study. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and told herself, very clearly, that she was not going to be her mother. The problem was that she was no longer entirely sure her mother had been wrong to love him. The Stowe family made their move on the 14th of November. It came not as a direct act, but as a social one, which, Rose supposed, was how such things were always done in this world. Lord Stowe appeared at the Alderton dinner, which Leopold had not known he would attend. He was civil, cold, and he spent the better part of the evening looking at Leopold the way a creditor looks at a man who has not yet realized his accounts are being called in. Cordelia was not there, but Lady Whitmore, who was Cordelia's aunt and her social proxy in all matters of London business, contrived to be seated near Lord Alderton and over the soup course managed to introduce into the conversation a question about the Duke of Ashcroft's health. She had heard, she said with tremendous sweetness, that his Grace had been unwell. Something with the liver, was it not? Terribly common in men of his age who lived as— She paused, smiled, as fully as the Duke was known to. Leopold, who was seated 4 places down and had excellent hearing, did not react. He told Rose about it afterward, standing in his study at 11 o'clock at night, and she understood from the restrained precision of his account that he was more shaken than he was willing to show. Not by the social attack. He had survived those before. By the confirmation. It was Cordelia, he said. Lady Whitmore would not have raised it without Cordelia's knowledge. It was Lord Stowe who arranged the poison, Rose said. Lady Cordelia may have known, or may have merely allowed herself not to know. The distinction matters to you. It matters legally. It matters morally. And practically, she met his gaze. Practically, what matters is that they believe you are still sick. They believe the attempt is still working. That is our advantage, and we will lose it the moment you appear publicly in good health. He was quiet. processing. Then, "You said our." She had. She hadn't noticed. A figure of speech. No. Something in his voice that she had learned to recognize over the past weeks. A quality of quiet insistence that appeared when he wanted to be believed. No, it was not. "You are invested in this. I am employed in this." Rose. "Don't." The word came out before she could stop it, raw and more honest than she intended. She pressed her lips together. In the candlelight, standing in his study at 11 at night with the notebooks on his desk and her compounds arrayed on the side table, the distance she had been so carefully maintaining felt suddenly insufficient. "Don't use my name like that. It makes it harder to..." She stopped. Harder to what? His voice was very quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, London made its distant, indifferent noise. "To do my job," she said at last. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she had given up trying to categorize. Something between recognition and restraint. Something that looked, if she was being dangerously honest with herself, like wanting. "Then I won't," he said, "not tonight." The tonight landed like a stone in still water. She left. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. The plan came from Leopold, who had always been better at strategy than she was, but it required Rose's knowledge to execute. It was elegant, and it was dangerous, and it turned entirely on the Stows, believing something that was no longer true. Lord Alderton arranged it. A dinner at his own house on the 21st of November, carefully constructed to include 3 members of the Stowe Circle alongside several people who were solidly in Leopold's camp. Leopold would attend, appearing still somewhat unwell. Rose compounded for him a preparation that would produce a convincing pallor and a slight unsteadiness without actually harming him, which she did with the particular controlled distaste of someone deploying a skill against its proper purpose. "This feels dishonest," she told him, as she explained the preparation. "It is theatre," he said. "Yes, which is dishonest." He gave her the closest thing to a smile she had yet seen from him, brief, sharp, warming something in her chest that she refused to examine. "You are the most inconveniently principled person I have ever employed." "You have not employed many honest people, then?" "No," he agreed, without apparent offence. "I have not." The dinner happened as planned. Leopold appeared, was seen, and was visibly less well than his usual standard, exactly as designed. Lady Whitmore was present, and Rose, attending as a household specialist, per Lord Alderton's charitable framing of her role, watched the older woman's face across the table and saw the satisfaction there. The quiet, vicious satisfaction of someone watching a plan come to its conclusion. 3 days later, Lord Stowe made his real move. He contacted Leopold's solicitor with a proposal. A significant purchase of Ashcroft farmland at a price that was, on its face, generous. The kind of offer a man accepts when he needs liquidity. The kind of offer that makes sense if you believe the man receiving it has perhaps 6 weeks to live, and no heir to contest the transaction. Leopold forwarded the proposal to Lord Alderton, who forwarded it to the appropriate legal authority, along with a statement from Rose, signed formally as Rose Mullins, daughter of Dr. Edmund Mullins, trained in botanical medicine, identifying the compound found in the Duke's private wine, its probable source, and its effects. A copy of the statement was also sent, quietly, to Dr. Hargreaves. Rose had argued for this. Leopold had initially disagreed. The physician was peripheral to the matter, but she had pressed the point. Hargreaves had prescribed a tonic in good faith that might have killed a man already poisoned. He deserved to know what had been inside his patient, and why. It was the correct thing to do. Leopold had looked at her for a moment with that particular expression she was learning to read, the one that meant he was revising something. Then he had said, simply, "Write the letter." She had. Dr. Hargreaves replied within 2 days. His letter was brief, formal, and contained, in its final paragraph, a sentence that Rose read 3 times, that he would be grateful, at some future date, for the opportunity to review Edmund Mullins's notes on the slow plant poisons. as they represented a body of knowledge the medical community had been too proud to pursue. He signed it with his credentials and his regards. She had not known, when she signed it, that Leopold had already ensured that her identity and her father's reputation were listed accurately and without embarrassment. She only found out when Lord Alderton mentioned it, in passing, as though it were nothing. He insisted, Lord Alderton said, watching her face, said your name should appear correctly, or not at all. She had nothing to say to that. She turned back to her compounds and said nothing for a very long time. Lord Stowe was confronted on the 29th of November in circumstances that Rose was not present for and heard about afterward from Lord Alderton, whose gift for narration was considerably more developed than Leopold's. The exchange had been, apparently, spectacular. Lord Stowe had denied everything with the particular confidence of a man who had not anticipated being caught, and had then, as the evidence was laid before him, passed through denial, anger, and a form of negotiation that Leopold had, by all accounts, declined to engage with entirely. What was said about Cordelia remained between the two men and was not shared. What was shared, what reached Rose through Lord Alderton's account, was the moment when Leopold apparently said, with absolute quiet, "You attempted to murder me in my own home. I intend for you to understand the full weight of that, and I intend for everyone whose opinion you value to understand it as well. We are finished, you and I, and if I ever have occasion to discuss you, I will describe you accurately." It was not the most dramatic statement. It was not a speech. But Lord Alderton described the way Lord Stowe had looked afterward, and Rose understood that sometimes the most devastating thing a powerful man can say is simply the truth, delivered without ornamentation. Cordelia sent a letter to Leopold that same afternoon. Rose did not see its contents. She was not meant to, but she saw Leopold sitting with it for a long time in the study that evening, and she left his tea on the desk and did not speak, and he did not ask her to stay. And she went upstairs with the particular heaviness of someone who has just realized that their story is not as simple as they thought. He had loved Cordelia, not deeply, not the kind of love that rearranges a person, but in the way of a man who had been prepared to offer what he thought was the appropriate version of himself to someone who seemed to require it. He had cared about her in his efficient, calculated way, and she had, or her family had, responded by trying to kill him. That was not nothing. Rose sat with her notebooks and tried to read and found, for the first time, that the plants could not hold her attention. She was thinking about the look on his face when he said he had been careless with people. She was thinking about the fact that he had insisted her name appear correctly on the legal statement. She was thinking about the word tonight, dropped weeks ago like a stone, still sinking. She did not know what Cordelia had written. She did not allow herself to wonder. Leopold sat with the letter for a long time. Cordelia's hand was elegant, as everything about her was elegant. The loops controlled, the ink even, the paper expensive. She had written to say that she had known her father was planning something, and that she had told herself it was grief talking, that he would not truly act, that she did not need to ask precise questions about wine deliveries and doctors. She had written that she was sorry, and that she was leaving for her aunt's estate in Northumberland, and that she wished Leopold a recovery she was certain he did not require. It was a good letter. It was honest, and it cost her something, and he respected both of those things. He sat with it, and he thought about Cordelia, her vanity, her grace, the way she had moved through society like something designed for it, and the fact that 2 seasons in her company had produced in him nothing more than a quiet, competent regard. He had been prepared to marry her the way he had been prepared to manage the estate accounts, methodically, correctly, with appropriate attention to the long-term implications. He thought about what it meant that a housemaid with her father's notebooks and a vial of questionable wine had produced, in 6 weeks, something that 2 years with Cordelia Stowe had not come close to. He thought about Rose telling him there was a difference between what was left behind and what was left to someone. He thought about her saying, "My freedom to leave, if I choose to." He folded Cordelia's letter. He put it in the drawer. He sat for another moment in the silence of his study, which was a different silence than it had been before October, warmer, somehow, and more inhabited. And then he stood up and went to find Rose. He came to find her. She was in the small room off the kitchen that she had converted into a workroom, surrounded by her notebooks and her compounds. And she heard the door and turned, and there he was. Not in his evening clothes, not in his precise professional armour, but in shirt sleeves, with his coat discarded somewhere, and looking, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had run out of careful. "Lord Stowe will accept the terms," he said. "It will be handled quietly. No trial. He will leave England." "Good. Cordelia." He stopped, started again. Cordelia was not party to the specifics. Her father acted without her full knowledge. She knew something was wrong and she did not ask, which is its own thing. "Yes," Rose said. "It is." He looked at her for a long moment across her cluttered work table. "I want to say something to you." Her hands were still. "Your Grace." "Leopold." The correction was quiet and absolutely certain. "I think we are past your Grace, Rose. I think we have been past it for some time." The room was very small. The candles were burning low. Outside, London hummed. "I know what you are afraid of," he said. "I know the shape of it. Your mother and my father, and the whole architecture of why a woman like you would be right to refuse a man like me without very specific and binding assurances." His voice was level, but something underneath it was not. "I am not going to ask you to trust me without reason. I'm going to give you the reason, and then ask." She waited, because her voice was not available to her just at that moment. "I intend," he said, "to make you an offer of marriage. A real one, not a management decision, not what I offered Cordelia, which was essentially a well-organized arrangement. I want to marry you, Rose, because you are the most remarkable person I've encountered in 32 years, and because the past 6 weeks have been the most alive I have felt since I inherited this title. And because I look at you, and He stopped. The precision failed him, and she watched it fail. And that, more than anything, undid something in her chest. "I look at you," he said again, more quietly, "and I think, there she is. That is what I want my life to look like." The candle nearest to her guttered. "It will be a scandal," she said. "Extraordinary. My father is a brilliant and irresponsible man whose daughter has surpassed him in every respect. The household, society, your political." Rose. Her name in his voice, at that particular pitch, was a thing she was going to have to learn to withstand. "Well, I spent 8 years being sensible. I built a solvent estate and a sound political reputation and a life that is correct in every measurable way and entirely empty. I am not prepared to be sensible about this." She looked at him across the work table with all her notebooks between them and her father's knowledge in the air and her mother's warning like a hand on her shoulder. And she thought about everything she had learned and everything she had protected and the 3 years of careful invisibility and the single conversation that had ended it. I need you to understand," she said carefully, "that I am not doing this because you are a duke. I am not doing this for security or position. I am doing this—" She stopped. Started again. "If I am doing this." "Yes," he said. "If. I am doing this because you are the first person in my life who looked at my knowledge and did not try to take it from me or dismiss it or use it against me. You simply let it be mine." She pressed her lips together. That is not a small thing." "No," he said softly. "It is not." She came around the table. Not quickly. She had never done anything quickly in her life, but with the particular deliberate quality of someone making a choice they intend to keep. She stopped 2 feet from him. "Then yes," she said. "And if you are asking—" "I am asking." "Then yes." He reached out and took her hand, not with the grip of possession, but with the careful, wondering touch of someone handling something genuinely precious. And she felt her mother's warning and her father's lessons and 3 years of careful invisibility all settle, gently, into their proper places, not gone, not forgotten, simply no longer the only thing. It was, as predicted, spectacular, The announcement appeared in the papers on the 4th of December, 1810. Leopold Ashcroft, Duke of Ashcroft, to wed Miss Rose Mullins, formerly of the household staff of Ashcroft Manor in Surrey. The social pages did not know what to do with this information for approximately 48 hours. They attempted to locate a noble family of Mullins that the bride might belong to, and then gave up and simply reported the facts, which were damning and irresistible in equal measure. The reactions came quickly. Lord Alderton sent a note that said simply, "Well, that is one way to do it." 3 of Leopold's political associates sent formal congratulations that were so carefully worded as to convey absolutely nothing. Lady Whitmore was said to have fainted, though Rose privately doubted this. Lord Stowe was already in the process of leaving for the continent and was not available for comment. Cordelia sent nothing. Leopold read his correspondence each morning with the same quality of indifference he brought to everything he had decided, and Rose watched him from across the breakfast table and thought that she was going to spend a very long time learning the exact geography of that face. Mrs. Baxter wrote from Surrey with a letter that Rose read 3 times. It was formal and correct and expressed, in the tight spaces between its proper sentences, something that might, very carefully, have been described as pleasure. Rose wrote back. She used her full name on the letter, Rose Mullins, soon to be Rose Ashcroft. She was still getting used to that. They married on the 12th of March, 1811, in the small chapel at Ashcroft Manor, with Lord Alderton as witness and Mrs. Baxter in the second pew, looking as though she had been correct about something for a very long time. The ceremony was not large. Leopold had offered large, and Rose had declined, because she had spent her life in the background, and the idea of 100 people watching her step forward was still more than she was prepared for all at once. There was time, she told him. There was plenty of time. He had agreed without argument. She was learning that he agreed without argument on anything that was genuinely about her. Her preferences, her comfort, her autonomy, with a consistency that she suspected would take her years to stop being surprised by. The afternoon after the wedding, they walked the grounds of the estate. The Surrey gardens were not yet in bloom. The spring was early but tentative, the kind that made promises it was not quite ready to keep. And Rose moved along the edges of the kitchen garden and the herb beds and named things, quietly. And Leopold walked beside her and listened. She had already, with his full support and not a little of his money, begun corresponding with 3 botanical scholars on the continent. She was writing up her father's notebooks, her notebooks now, in a form that might one day be publishable. She was teaching the undergardener's daughter, a 12-year-old with an extraordinary eye for plant varieties, what she knew. Knowledge, she had always believed, was a form of protection. She was beginning to believe it was also a form of gift. Leopold stopped beside her at the edge of the herb garden and looked out at the grey-green beginning of things, and she felt the warmth of him beside her, solid, unhurried, present, and thought about 3 years of careful invisibility and the single afternoon that had ended it. She had not saved him, she thought, because she was brave. She had saved him because she knew things, and knowing things had always been the only power she had, and she had simply, at the crucial moment, refused to waste it. That was all. That was everything. "What is that one?" Leopold asked, pointing. She looked. "Yarrow. The one you used for me. One of them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "It looks ordinary." "Most things that save you do," Rose said. He looked at her then, and she let herself be looked at, fully, without the careful management of visibility she had practiced her entire life. And the smile that crossed his face was not the brief, sharp thing she had first seen in his study. It was slower. It was warmer. It was, she thought, the smile of a man who had finally arrived somewhere he intended to stay. She took his hand. They stood like that for a while. The Duke and his Duchess, the man who had been invisible to himself, and the woman who had been invisible to everyone, finding in each other something neither had known to look for. Below them, the first green was pushing through the cold Surrey earth. Above them, the sky was the clean pale colour of a day that had decided to be good. "Leopold," she said. He turned to look at her. And there it was again, that quality of attention, full and unhurried, and entirely hers. She had learned, over these months, that this was simply how he looked at things he valued. The difference was that she had once been invisible to him, and now she was not. And the distance between those two states was the whole of her life rearranged. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that I understand what you gave up. The scandal, the political cost, the look on Lord Alderton's face at the wedding, which was admirable but did not quite conceal his alarm." Leopold's mouth curved. "Alderton will survive." "Yes, but I want you to know I see it. I am not. I do not take it lightly." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the particular quality it got when he was choosing his words with care, not because he was uncertain, but because the thing he wanted to say mattered and he intended to say it correctly. "Rose, what I gave up was a version of my life that was correct and empty. What I have now is considerably more complicated." "Is that a complaint?" "It is the opposite of a complaint." She leaned into him, not dramatically, not with the grand gesture of a woman in a novel, but with the simple weight of a person who has decided, after a long time of standing alone, that it is safe to rest against something. He put his arm around her, and they stood at the edge of the herb garden in the March light, and it was quiet, and it was real, and it was enough. The garden was just beginning. So were they. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss a new episode. Drop a comment. Was Rose right to trust him? Let me know below. Hit the bell. New stories every day.